and I'm hoping that you can hear me. Please let me know by actually writing in the question box if in case you can hear me. Awesome. Thank you. So I'm just going to wait for 1 more minute before starting, as it's 6:29. All right, I'm back. Hello everyone again. My name is Nandini Darsi, and I'm currently working with Accenture. I have about 22 years of experience in the industry. I come with a background of psychology. I'm a certified coach and a counselor. I have had an opportunity to work in this industry with experts such as you, associates, clients, in fact, and then there are a lot of things that I have observed and learned as part of my work in leadership development. Culture and understanding culture, working within multiple cultures has been one of my passions, and I've had an opportunity also to study various cultures as part of my work. And whatever I'm going to share today, most of them are my own observations or research from various parts of the industry, and is not endorsed by my organization. I just wanted to state that right there. These are my personal observations and experiences that I've had and the insights I have gained over the years. So I hope you also can bring out your own perspectives and also ask me some questions along the way. And for one thing, I'm very happy to be here to be talking about this IIBA. And as business analysts, I know what you do is very relevant for the teams that you represent, for the organizations that you represent. And culture also is a very key aspect. And some knowledge around managing different cultures might be of relevance to you. So here is the agenda that I wanted to share with you. We'll just, of course, I'm not an expert on business analysis, and that's not what I'm going to represent, but I'm going to share my perspective of what you probably do, and also then move on towards understanding conversations in business, right? So pretty much when you are interacting with your various stakeholders, you do so through various conversations. So how do you wing that conversation? How do you steer that conversation? What sort of questions should you ask? Or even what are they saying, even though they might be speaking English? And pretty much in our business communities across the globe now, most of us are using English. But still, what we say, how we say it, even though the words are same, they have a cultural context. And so could be misleading for us to assume that apple is an apple in English. So it's important to understand what conversations represent in business and how culture could be at the center of these conversations. I'm going to broader that perspective and go and look at the whole globe from a cultural lens. In that sense, I'm going to go beyond India or beyond a country, and I'm I'm going to try and see if I can put in front of you a Western and Eastern perspective on culture and how that plays a part in our interactions and conversations. And hopefully all of this will help us and help you prepare and impact more powerfully in your own spheres of influence. So that, in net, is the agenda in the 1 hour that we're going to spend together. So to, you know who business analysts are, but pretty much at the center of what you do, you are known for the analysis that you bring to the table. And you're seen as someone who can look at various pieces of information, put it together, see the unseen, analyze it, bring about some level of synthesis, and then once you have your insights, you're expected to also communicate to your various stakeholders. That, I think, is in a nutshell what you do. In this context, you interact with different people at different levels, representing different pieces of a puzzle, and you're trying to understand how it impacts them, what are priorities for them, what are the dependencies, who are the end users, what their expectations are, what could be some risks along the way, what should people be aware of, and all of these aspects actually help you build and suggest a solution. In that sense, you are really, defining and scoping the business, you're eliciting requirements, you're analyzing and documenting the various requirements that come to you. You're also communicating what you're understanding from your various stakeholders. And that helps you identify what could be a potential solution or varieties of maybe multiple solutions. And then you also are looking to see if the final solution that you came up with actually meets the requirements or not. So you see, as a business analyst, you are there everywhere, or the need for you is in the complete cycle of business. And in that sense, you are a change agent. You're seen as a driver for change. And so you have a very valid, very real, very significant role to play in business. However, for you to do all of this effectively, I think it's important to recognize that communication plays a key aspect. While many of us understand a lot of things, only few of us actually know how to articulate what we are understanding. And how impactfully you articulate is key. Secondly, this articulation also requires some level of sensitivity on culture, on what your customer or your various stakeholders are expecting. How do they like to listen to, listen? What impresses them? What are their drivers? What are their motivators? All of these have a role to play in terms of how well you communicate or otherwise. So meanwhile, as I'm moving forward, if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to just type it, and we'll take those into consideration as we move along. At this point, I think we understand, yes, you have a significant role to play, and you are communicating your learnings, your insights to others. What I'm introducing at this point is culture, right? Culture and how it plays a part in business. While we might assume, most of us, yes, all of us are people, all of us are humans on this planet, and pretty much at a broader level, what makes us happy makes most people happy. However, meanings could be very, very contextual, and it's important to understand the value that people place on various things, and this could be impacted by culture. What is also something that you need to keep in mind is unknowingly we might say something, do something, or come up with a solution which may be something that may not be taken well. It could lead to conflicts, it could lead to delays, errors, and even at times you might lose a very valuable relationship. So, and I will give quite a few examples as we go along the way. But let me give one example right here. Expectation. So if you were to have a meeting with somebody in India, the expectation might be that, okay, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, time could be stretched, and everybody knows that. And we expect that, all right, people might be slightly delayed. And it might be a sin, but it might be a forgivable sin. Whereas in certain cultures, may not be. You might have lost quite a bit of ground if you are late. And then when I mean late, it's not just about meetings, even about commitments, even about turnarounds. Even if something, as you know, hey, I'll send it to you end of the day, and you don't, or you assume end of the day is by the time the client wakes up in the morning and gets into work and then opens his computer and gets an opportunity to see the mail. So how we interpret schedules, for example, is contextual, and it is about setting those different expectations, right? So how do you set right expectations comes from an understanding of what they bring as expectations to the table. We don't, say for example in India, if we visit somebody's home, the expectation is that we probably will leave our shoes outside. Nobody's actually saying that. Nobody's actually putting up a poster there saying, please leave your shoes outside. But we know that there is an expectation from the family that we are visiting that we will leave our shoes outside and that we will sit in the hall and we will very politely wait there or sit there. So these are all very subtle expectations. And for the host, or even the guests expect that the host will ask, do you need water? Do you need anything? These are unsaid expectations, right? We don't necessarily, go with our with boards on us saying that these are my expectations. This is how I need to be handled. This is how I need to be serviced. However, when you're talking about multiple cultures or different cultures, they go haywire. And that's what leads to conflicts, delays, errors, and even break in relationship. Do you have any questions at this point or some examples that you want to share? Please feel free to write that. So I just want to draw your attention to two things. In fact, two key elements for business: task and relationship. We get paid for completion of tasks, but we get to do that through collaboration or in connect with other people. So relationships become very important. Task and relationship. And if I were to ask, what's more important for you, task or relationship? What do you think some of you might say? Task or relationship? You could actually just type it in. Okay. So I'm seeing mostly relationship, and one or two folks saying both. And one even says, okay, tasks if dealing with US clients. So there is your intuition, right? Okay, very good. So relationships are important for successful execution. They create tasks. Very good. And I'm glad that you are responding, and I see a lot of responses here. Very good. And yet, it's a question to debate on because it's very hard to just say one. Largely, both seem to be important for us, but for many of us, one seems to be more important than another one. And you clearly, some of you have realized that for some cultures, task becomes more important. And that is key to understand. And everything flows from there. So if you can see this slide, I've created a 2x2 matrix with task on one side and relationship on the other. Largely, it has been observed that some countries give more importance to relationship and some countries give more importance to task. But end of the day, both want that star where neither the task gets affected nor this relationship is impacted. It's just that how they approach might be different. So let me give an example. You see the two arrows there, right? If somebody like a US American, for example, might approach, again, please note this, we are looking at the whole thing from an aeroplane. There is no intent here to stereotype or say all certain, everybody in a certain country is in one way and others in another country are very different. No, that's not what we're trying to say. What we're trying to say is chances, probability. So assuming somebody from the US is approaching task and relationship, chances are that he or she would think if the task is satisfactorily taken care of, executed, my trust in the relationship increases. So the direction is through the task. If my task is taken care of, then my trust gets reinforced, and so I will invest in the relationship. And the cycle continues like that. I will give more tasks. And then I'm more satisfied. Consistently, I'm seeing them handled well. I will invest in that relationship further. That's how somebody from the West might think. Someone from the East, on the other hand, would think just the other way around. So it's all about the approach, right? So someone from the East might think, okay, if we get along with each other, then we'll be comfortable talking to each other, and then tasks automatically happen. If the task happens, then, relationship is strengthened, and then I will be able to focus more on the task. And so the relationship is focused more. You see the key difference between the East and the West? East is relationship oriented. West is largely task oriented. And many of us are working with clients from a task oriented country. I would assume that most of your clients are largely from the West. Then you might have a few countries that you're working with from the East, such as Malaysia, China, and they would be more relationship oriented. But then I'm generalizing here. I don't want you to take this as, the be all and end all, or it's, set in stone. Largely also depends on how much of exposure both countries, both sides of the planet have on the other, and what sort of adaptations they would have made along the way. So treat each individual separately, avoid judging, but largely you can expect, especially for clients which are new to outsourcing, for example, or new to working with the Eastern countries or Indians for that matter, you can expect that there will be certain level of confusions just because of this approach. And let me show you why. I hope you're able to see my slide. The first column is about certain values that pretty much everybody on the planet represents, but the behaviors could be very, very different. So if you look at the next two columns, you see relationship-oriented countries. I have given some examples. And then there are task-oriented countries, right? So what's important for us to note here is that just by being relationship-oriented, what could be certain behaviors? And by being task-oriented, what could be certain behaviors? That's what we will try and focus. Right. So if you see the first one, which is on the people orientation, that means how do we connect with people around us? And what is our role vis-a-vis other people? In relationship-oriented countries, such as India, most of us are always aware of the groups that we are part of. And that means we understand power. We understand that, okay, some people could be more powerful than others, right? Whereas in the task-oriented countries, you will see most of them as individualistic. Even though they are part of groups, they are able to stand up, have an opinion of their own, much more confidently, not feeling that they will be isolated in the group. For us in India, there is always that fear that we might be isolated, we might not be accepted or shunned, or being embarrassed or corrected. Those are fears that exist in a group-oriented country. In the individualistic country, they prefer to be on their own largely. They prefer to have certain level of boundary, clarity in their roles. They expect that they will be reasonably empowered to do their job on their own. In the group oriented, we expect that, okay, some level of deference needs to be given to the manager or someone of authority or superiority. We are okay to allow the leader to take the decision for the rest of us. In the individualistic scenarios, probably consensus is required. And some countries, such as the Scandinavian countries, for example, they would be, let's say, a decision is made only when everybody agrees to any change. So that, that everybody's role is critically important. So it's more about the I versus the we that you can think about. Secondly, about the social relationships, how are we with our, how do we socialize? We are seen as much more emotional from the Eastern perspective. The West is seen as more logical. So heart and the head, I suppose. If it makes sense, if the relationship is working, then they invest in it. Whereas in the East, if the relationship is, even though it may not be working, but there is an element of loyalty there, and an element of how would we be viewed in the group if the relationship breaks. So there is always that emotional decision making here. The West is seen as more rational in their decision making. Pros and cons, working, not working, they make their decisions based on that. Coming to space. Space is about resources or even about our own space around us. Largely in the East and in Eastern countries, that if we go out for a lunch or dinner, chances are mostly one person pays for the bill or insists that he or she pays the bill, and usually it's the manager or the eldest in the family, etc. But in the West, you see that largely maybe they all pay their own bills. Some of you who would have traveled and experienced across the globe, you see nowadays, bills are made individually for each person, and they come and come to the table, and you pay for what you've eaten or what you drank. But in Indian restaurants, you still see there's only one bill, and largely one person is paying. Nowadays, we're also seeing the younger generation sharing, but they might do it afterwards or before. But for that moment in front of public, usually one person still pays. So you can think of this in multiple places, in terms of your desk space, in terms of your resources such as a pen, your book, your coffee cup, etc. Anything. All of those are about, whether you're comfortable sharing or not. In the West, this is also represented by taking care of your own space around you, meaning managing how your office space looks, making sure you trash it yourself rather than being dependent on somebody else to pick up your coffee cup, etc. Here we are dependent on each other. We share responsibilities also. And coming to time, there is that feeling always that in India, time is flexible, relationship has to be respected. So, for example, even this conversation, if there is interest, most of us might be thinking, okay, so we should be a little bit flexible, etc. But for a Westerner, chances are it's 7:30, they will leave. So time lost is money lost, right? And Indians might be seen as a little bit more flexible in terms of time. Coming to, the time and tasks, polychronic means multitask. Task at a time. Now, the best example I can think of is if you visit, let's say, a cafeteria and you're trying to take a coupon, very rarely we actually queue up. And the lady or the person who's servicing, selling these coupons might actually, be serving multiple people at the same time. And this is because the lady there is trying to please everybody. So we are flexible. We want to be seen as acceptable. We want to be communicating to them that, I want to help you. That is about being polychronic. On the other hand, you would have experienced, some of you who would have traveled, that they would prefer to do one person at a time. In the sense, they will service, they will help one person. Only after that, they even make eye contact with the next person. So that is monochronic. Next, we see power distance, right? And this is about, if you think of your organization as a pyramid or as a triangle, now how tall is that triangle? That's what you need to think about. So authoritative is that, few people are more powerful than most of the organizations. Egalitarian is fewer layers. More or less, people seem that as if they're equal, or at least they perceive that they have a say in what happens. Egalitarian. Attitude to others. Here, in India, for example, we are very comfortable speaking about our family, our personal life, pretty much with most of our colleagues. Whereas in the West, you might have seen that, okay, they would prefer to keep their personal life very, very separate from work life. And while they are friendly, there's a difference between being formal and friendly or informal. So sometimes we might assume that, okay, because he or she is friendly, that he or she has become also a friend. May not be. So that depends on individual to individual. But I think for Indians, it is critical to know that being friendly is different from becoming friends. So what the West, the way they would approach of relationships at workplaces, being very friendly and informal, direct, comfortable in, having a conflict, a healthy conflict. It doesn't mean the relation, but they're able to have a healthy conflict as well. But private, the friends in their life might be completely different. They may not even get an idea of what is happening on their work front. For us in India, though, we tend to also have friends at workplace. We also socialize at workplace, and we might even plan holidays with our colleagues, etc. So that is one key aspect for you to also understand. Now, the next one on communication is interesting, right? Context is very important for us to understand. For us, the context is the group, and that's why it becomes high. So what that means is, whatever I say or do has an impact on the group. So I'm always very careful to please the group or be accepted in the group or seen as having a status in the group, or even if I have a message to give in the group. So even though I might be talking to clients, if I'm always conscious of the impact of what I say on my group. And that's why I'm very indirect, typically, from a relationship orientation. However, since the West is largely individualistic, they're not, let's say, overly influenced by what the group thinks, they're able to be a little bit more direct. Of course, within their own spheres of control, largely, right? But you will see that on the floor, sometimes the clients experience that high context and indirect behavior. We might say, yeah, it will all work out. Don't worry about it. It's being taken care of. Somebody's taking care of it. Oh, yeah, we're fixing it. So these are the things that we try to communicate, rather than specifically saying, yeah, you're right, there is an issue there, or we understand there is a risk, and these are the 2 things or 3 things that we are planning around it. That would be very direct communication. We prefer to play a little safe. We'd like to say, okay, don't worry, it'll be taken care of, those kind of things. So sometimes what this also leads to is a lot of words. Sometimes if somebody asks, can this be done, we may neither say yes nor no. We might just go around explaining multiple things, hoping that they get the message. Right? That's on focus on substance more than style. So it could, sometimes you would have experienced some of our leaders or even our colleagues trying to explain something, but taking a lot of time doing so. That is about being indirect, adding a lot of words into what you're trying to communicate. Many of you might know what assertiveness is. Assertiveness is your ability to basically speak your mind. If you have an opinion, a thought process, a perspective, you're able to communicate clearly, specifically, or not. That's what assertiveness is. So again, as we can expect, because we are group oriented, because we are not necessarily seen as high risk takers, we are low on assertiveness. We are scared or we worry what might be a consequence of speaking our mind confidently or strongly on something, especially if a manager is there or a person of higher authority is there in the conversation. As can be expected from individualistic societies, assertiveness also seems to be high. The last one on task itself. How is our orientation on tasks? Now you see two words there, product and process. Product is the end goal really, the goal post, right? So in the East, we are more focused on the end goal. You know, if I promised it will be done, it will be done. In the West, they put their money on the process. We put our money on the end goal. So they are planners. They'll put A, B, C, D, E, multiple milestones, a path towards each milestone, and their thought process is, okay, if the milestones are being met, that means product is coming. Whereas for us, we may change process along the way, and we may be, okay, you know, this we thought about it, it doesn't work, we need to change it. Who we thought might be able to do something suddenly is not able to, so I have to find somebody else to do it, blah, blah, blah. We are changing constantly, and this leads us to also change process. Now I'm just going back to the earlier slide that I showed you, which is on the task and relationship. Now as you can see, what it means, you know, approaching from a task perspective, and now you also know what it means when you approach relationship perspective. So task perspective, to summarize, means that it doesn't matter who the other person is I'm interacting with. To me, the task that we committed needs to happen. And my trust in you in front of me increases when I see the task happening. And someone from the East, on the other hand, who's approaching from a relationship perspective, what it means is, okay, let's have some small talk, let's get comfortable with each other, let's like each other. It's important to like each other. It doesn't matter whether I like you or not. In the East, it's important, and we invest a lot of time and money to make the other person like us. So if we like each other, then chances are, you know, we are comfortable speaking our mind to the other person. Our confidence increases when we feel the other person accepts us. That's what relationship orientation is. Now, as I was saying, meaning itself is contextual. I said that earlier. Now, you know, task and relationship are two words interpreted very differently in cultures itself. So for the West, relationships are two. There's work relationship, there's personal relationship. Work relationship is mainly through task. If the task is satisfactory, if what you committed is taken care of, and I see that happening, my trust increases. What questions do you have at this point before I move to the next slide? Any thoughts, comments, your own experiences? And please note, these are general. My intent is not to say all folks from the East are represented, or that all folks from the West are represented through just this one slide. These are what you call observations and theories that researchers have made, and gives us good guidance. Many of us, if we take an assessment, for example, we might find that you may not be completely relationship oriented, or you might not be completely task oriented. Chances are you would have adapted over time, and you're partly this and you're partly that. So each individual could be very, very different, but it's great guidance for us as we are thinking about interactions and conversations. So here, these are all really scales, and some of them are interesting, right? You can see, what you could experience. In some meetings, you might experience lot more status. These are scales. You can think of them as some of your clients and people that you interact with might be somewhere in between, or somebody might be clearly status oriented, or very, very person oriented in the sense equal oriented, which is egalitarian. You would have experienced some meeting where the detailing that people enter into is about the clarity in meetings. The meeting without having clarity on what is discussed, every aspect of the task, meaning details. Whereas in the East, we see largely high level, indirect, and we might walk out with a lot of assumptions. Then there are, you can expect planned activity all through. East, you will see largely spurts, right? In the West, time is at the core, so commitments, schedules, very, very key. And here in the East, maybe time is sometimes taken slightly for granted. Okay, there is a question that came up. How do we identify if a client is task-oriented, ship-oriented from the initial few minutes that we spend with him or her? So great question. For one thing, if let's say you're meeting somebody from the West, assume that he or she will be task-oriented first. Then test your hypothesis. Maybe you'll be wrong. That's okay. Then you can shift your gears to also respond from a relationship perspective. And that would mean you have to give him importance. You have to also let him or her speak most of the time, etc. Recognize that give him that space that he wants. But I would say largely assume if you're interacting with someone from the West, make sure that you're on time. Make sure you're, you look efficient, you sound efficient. That means properly dressed, respect yourself in how you dress, is all seen as task orientation. Many the Westerners might assume if you can't take care of yourself, how can you take care of me or my business? So they would want to see you as in control of your schedule, in control of your life. It's quite important for a Westerner. But then they're also testing you, right? Just as you're testing him. I hope that helped. The other three, inputs or scales you can see are about risk or being, high risk or low risk, how cautious or, we are. Milestones, big and small, how much focus is given to those milestones versus just the final outcome. I have a good example to give about the final outcome. How, many of you might have seen the movie Lagan, Amir Khan's movie, which came out quite a few years ago, Lagan. And in that movie, if you remember the story, Amir Khan is from this small village, and they have to pay taxes to the British, and they don't have the money to pay. So Amir Khan accepts a challenge from the British that they will beat them in cricket. Now the deal is, if they beat, then the taxes are cancelled. If they lose, they have to pay double the taxes. Now they accept this. That is the final outcome. At that point, when he accepts it, it's a completely emotional decision. Now they have no other option. This is a solution. At least, they need to take that risk. So they agree on something they know they can't do. If he looks at his team at that point, nobody even knows what cricket is. They've never played it. They've never seen it. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the tools or the skills at that point. So, but it's the final outcome, the goal that they have to reach, right? So On the other hand, milestones and big and small is about first looking at what tools you have, what skills you have, who are the people, that big, frog. How do you make it into pieces? Basically, what is that first piece? What comes second piece? How do you piece them together? And how does it finally lead to the final product? So that is the key difference between, your perspectives. Now, the last one, as I already mentioned, is about keeping your personal life very separate. For Indians, especially as I see when how they rate an organization is also depending on how connected they feel with others in the organization. So those personal contacts are very, very important at workplace. Otherwise, they find themselves very bored. Oh, I don't like this organization. I really find it very boring. I don't even see anybody. I don't connect with anybody, etc. But for the West, they don't go there for connects. They go there for money, to make a living for themselves, so that they go and enjoy their life after work. They participate in various clubs. They meet people as part of these clubs, and then they have a different life altogether outside of workplace. So these are, I think, a few things very, very important for us to keep in mind. And I also want to bring to context what all of this means for many of us at work, and especially for you as business analysts. Pretty much you have various conversations. Now they are meetings, and they could be one-on-one meetings. They could be multiple people in the meeting. Now, when I'm saying if it's a group of people, they all come with their own contexts. If someone might be coming in there from East, somebody might be there from the West. Even within the East, someone might be from China, from Malaysia, from India. Pretty much you will have a mixed bag of people with mixed bag of expectations and even meanings, right? Now, how do you manage that? It's very, very important, right? So, and what's also important is for us to remember what others experience from us, especially the West. And this comes again from my own personal interactions with clients, what they tell me in my conversations, what their observations are as well. So they find that when we work when they work with us, we leave a meeting with very grand promises. Oh, it'll be done. Yeah, I'll send it to you today. 100%, I'll try my best. All of these, we make these grand promises, and then they leave feeling, okay, looks like they'll make it work. But does it lead or not is anybody's experience. But what I wanted to state here is, are we leaving with promises that we can keep, or are we leaving with a promise just to please them for that moment? So it's a point to reflect for a second. Then what they also experience is schedules go haywire, estimation issues, sometimes again to please, to push, we agree to what you call as unrealistic schedules sometimes. Our inability to negotiate sometimes, is obvious. And negotiate, when I mean even on the schedule, not necessarily about money. I'm just talking about, can this be done tomorrow? Our ability to say may not be. Would it be okay if I send it to you on such and such a time, on such and such a day? That itself is a negotiation. So some of us are not assertive enough to have that kind of a conversation, and it is important to, if you want to increase trust, then it's important to understand these schedules. What they also experience on a positive note is that they see us as very flexible, collaborative, and willing to go the extra mile. And that's a good thing, right? But what again also impacts their trust in us is that when they, have meetings with us, our reports almost always seems green, meaning we rarely highlight the red flags. We don't bring to conversation what could go wrong. And their trust actually increases if you have the courage to say, you know what, it's not going as per plan. At least they'll respect that and they'll say, okay, so what do you think we should do? And then you can have a conversation. They might get angry at that moment, but they will trust you to bring it to their attention. And so that risk-taking is something that they expect, but they don't experience. Our conversations tend to be rather transactional, especially for you as business analysts. It's important to build that muscle as well. Are you making a conversation? Are you able to make them feel that they're comfortable with you beyond 10 minutes? Can you hold their attention for an hour? Can you engage them for a longer time? Not just about impressing about what you know, but about asking questions generally on multiple topics, ability to listen, ability to synthesize, ability to share your own insights, etc. That's about conversation. Can you engage them for a long period of time? Now, I don't know the next one if it is applying to business analysts or not, but largely, we oscillate between excessive selling, that we are the best, our organization is the best, India has the best potential, India is this, so blah, or to being extremely humble. So certain countries, such as Scandinavian countries, for example, does not appreciate, and this is an unsaid expectation, grand introductions. They don't appreciate titles. They prefer to work with somebody as an equal, as another person who's also trying to solve a particular problem. So it's important to match. I mean, what I'm trying to say is listen where they are coming from, what they probably are looking from you. In the first few minutes, you should be able to, gauge what their expectation is and respond to that. Yeah. And the last one is they don't see a clear, let's say a clear difference between planning and execution. We seem to be doing those two together. So these are a couple of things that the West experiences when they work with Indians. But at this point, I'm just going to pause. I think we have about 10 minutes, and I would rather spend that time responding to some of your questions. And as you're typing, I think it's important to appreciate that culture is at the core of what we communicate with people. We may be saying something, but it might be interpreted as something else. For example, simple word, customers always ask, why do Indians always say yes? And I try to tell them that, what, Indians are not saying yes as an agreement. They're only telling you politely that they're listening to you. Yes, I'm listening to you. Please continue speaking. And they're, oh, is that right? I thought they were agreeing to what I'm saying. And so a simple word, but the whole message could change. So there's one more question. Okay, at a global level, which approach is more effective and recognized, Western or Eastern? Now, my perspective, I think just as we've accepted English as a language that largely business is done, the Western way of doing business is largely considered probably business transaction. End of the day, if you think about even time, for example, in today's world, we are working with people from 4 or 5 different time zones, right? And if we all agree to meet at a certain time, we have no option but to meet at that time. Otherwise, we lose out a great opportunity to be part of a meeting that is happening. So, I think largely the Western style of working is appropriate for business, but Eastern way is more appropriate for social relationships, in my perspective. There is more, division of responsibilities in the house. There is also that loyalty factor built into, and so that brings us a lot of patience and understanding for each other as well. So, would you classify Indian vendors as risk takers or risk averse? So, right now, if you look at Indian vendors, we are high risk takers, and that's because we're playing the Lagan game, right? We may or may not have the tools and the skills required, right? But we have hairy ambitions. Another important thing to keep in mind, I'll probably share that here as well. There is a researcher by the name Hofstede, Hofstede. You might be able to, Google on him and read a little bit more as well. But he defines countries as masculine countries and feminine countries. Masculine countries are defined by competition and aggressiveness. India is a highly masculine country, very aggressive, achievement oriented. So it again comes from a perspective of social standing, highly aggressive. America is also a very masculine country. So achievement is key for masculine countries. Whereas a Scandinavian country, for example, such as Denmark, Sweden, they are seen as very feminine countries. Feminine country is more seen as quality of life. So they prefer a balance in life as more important than achievement. So from that perspective, yes, Indians are high risk takers at this moment, and our strength comes from being part of a large group, a pack, right? So individually, we are risk averse. As a group, we are high risk takers. That's my take on it. At a global level, okay. Netherlands, yeah, Netherlands again are seen as feminine countries as well. May not be as feminine as a Scandinavian country, but largely they are seen as feminine, task-oriented. They prefer their personal life to be very separate. Whereas if you think of a country such as France, Italy, Spain, they're again relationship-oriented. So there's another question. How do we identify if a client, hold on. I only work with a client. Southeast Asian clients. Any specific tips to follow? Can you specify the exact country, Southeast Asian? I'm assuming the Orient. Now the Orient are again relationship-oriented countries, but they're also slightly different from Indians as well. Their body language might be very subtle. Indians, if you noticed, we use gestures a lot. We use our body, our facial expressions to express. If you look at a Westerner, someone from Europe, for example, again in the northern parts of Europe, such as Germany, etc., body movements are there, but they're not as much as us, right? If you look at Arabic countries, if you look at Russia, for example, we are very comfortable in using our body. We express through our body. Orient is very subtle in body expressing through the body. If you have to observe for those subtle changes in their facial expressions and body expressions as well. So, but they are relationship oriented. Any specific tips to follow during requirement gathering workshops to make it successful? Yes, again, if you take these inputs from what we just discussed, when you're meeting them, whether someone's coming from the West or East, it's very important. If you're meeting somebody from East, and especially the Orient, expect pretty much what you would expect from India, that there could be delays in decision making. There could be deference to the seniority. If the manager is there, the others may not speak much. You might have to build relationships with them. You would have to interact with them personally. Maybe one-on-one you'll have to get them to express more details. Otherwise, they will be at very high level. They'll leave a meeting without getting into specifics, etc. So you might have to pretty much use the tactics. But if you're working with West, you might have to use the tactics that work there. That means being very specific, very clear in your communication, summarizing after meetings, also using checklists, making sure your checklist is, completed and that you update on a timely basis. You're aware of the milestones and communicate any risk that is happening. So you have to be more specific when you're interacting with Westerners. So requirement gathering might be, you'll have to ask very directly. Don't assume that they will tell you everything or that they have told you everything. They expect you to ask the questions. You should have that courage to ask. Questions such as, okay, who else do I need to talk to? Who else could be impacted? What could be some dependencies here? What am I not asking? Where do you think I will get the right information? These are questions that you will need to ask very directly to someone in the West. Any other questions? So I'm conscious of the time, and it is exactly 7:31. If you have any further questions, or if you want to hear more about this, please let the organizers of this webinar know, and I will share some articles that might be of interest to you, or I can come back and talk about another area of your interest around culture, around people, around leadership, and I would be very happy to support you in whatever way I can in your own success. So thank you very much, and I hope the presentation has been helpful, and I wish you the very best. Thank you very much.